Yeah, the dad jokes.
These are parental jokes. All right, on that note, we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. I'm Ron Harvey. I am the current, I'm nearing, you hear that sound? That's the sound of my chairmanship of the Self-Help and Mutual Support Interest Group ending. I've done this position for 2 years. The last time I saw Thomasina in person was at the SCRA Biennial in Chicago 2 years ago. And that's how I got in. And so welcome to this informal roundtable discussion about self-help and mutual support and peer support. And is there a confluence of these disciplines coming together? This is a very informal roundtable discussion. Anyone and everyone can participate if they so choose. I will ask you to use the Zoom raise hand feature if you have something to say. And my co-chair for this session is Thomasina Borkman, who I see right next to me in the Zoom. And Thomasina has been working doing self-help research for many, many, many years. She's retired from George Mason University. She's a professor emeritus. There's a different term for professor emeritus for females, and I forget what that is.
Emerita.
Emerita. And thank you. And is the co-editor of the column in the Community Psychologist for our interest group. And so just a little bit of background. This group has been in existence for many, many years and has flowered and done several things, very fruitful things in the area of self-help and mutual support. And towards the end of last year, we have a quarterly Zoom meeting. It was brought up that we should probably, that the membership and interest for the interest group is waning a little bit over the past couple of years. And there was the observation that that a lot of research and a lot of interest is now in the field of peer support. Peer support has really expanded quite a lot in terms of its scope. And so it's closely related to self-help, but not quite the same. And so it was, the proposal was to perhaps we should expand the interest group to include peer support. And so we had a couple of Zoom meetings since then to talk about expanding this, and some of it have been quite contentious. Part of the reason is our field has been mostly dominated by academics, people who work in universities, people who do research, and peer support is very often practitioners. And so what we would like to do during this roundtable discussion is to talk about all these different viewpoints, to talk about the mission statement, the current mission statement for the interest for the mutual, for the self-help and mutual support interest group, talk about possibilities for expanding the mission statement to include peer support, and then just open it up to anything that the participants think is important for us to know. And the hopeful resolution at the end of this is that we all learned a lot about self-help, mutual support, peer support, and the ways that they can help each other and inform each other in terms of increasing the knowledge base. This meeting is scheduled for 3 hours. I hope to God it does not take 3 hours, but we shall see. If we need it, then the time will probably go by fast and pleasantly. But it is an informal meeting. We'll take a 5-minute break at the top of each hour. So that's something to look forward to. And the meeting has a rule of 2 feet. You can come and go as you wish. And that's it. SCRA is the Society for for Community Research and Action. It is these APA Division 27. And we have the current executive director of SCRA here with us, Amber. If you can wave, Amber, that's great. And very new in the position, Amber, a couple months, something like that. Yep. And so we have a good representation. We would like, there's not a lot of people here. If there were 37 people here, I would not have people, I would have not have people introduce themselves, but if maybe we can skip that, unless Thomasina, you think it's important.
Well, I mean, why skip it when we have time? I just got a call. Ruth Holman doesn't have a link. Amber, can you send Ruth Holman the link to this?
I can send it to her as well.
Okay.
Did she recently, did Ruth recently sign up with the Sign Up Genius? Because I did another send out 5 minutes before the meeting as a reminder.
Well, she didn't get it. She just called me 2 minutes ago. So.
I'll send it to her.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, the login's a little wonky. It's weird.
Yeah, she's.
Okay.
And I'll monitor the email, and I'll do my best to monitor the chat. I have several things going on my laptop screen here at once.
And I'll keep an eye on the chat as well too. So if you need any help, I can, or if we have any questions, I can stop you too.
Thanks, Yavita. Thank you so much.
Oh, Ron, do you mind if we just also just introduce Yadviga, our administrative coordinator? You've probably gotten a lot of emails from her just with biennial and pre-conferencing. And so just to put a face to the names, because you guys have probably seen her name via email. So.
Hi all, my name is Yadviga and I'm the administrative coordinator for SCRA. I'm fairly new in the position as well. I started in December, but I've been a member of SCRA since I was an undergraduate. So, which I mean was only 4 years ago, so it's not that long, but I'm really happy to be here with you guys and to provide support through the next couple of weeks. So great to be a part of this community of community psychology.
Yeah. Ron, I'm interested in why people came to this and if they have any interest in the interest group.
Great.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, then let's do that. So I've introduced myself. I'm going to pass this on to, this is an improv game. I'm going to pass this on to somebody who's going to introduce themselves and state why they're here and what they hope to get out of this roundtable. And when they're done, they should pass it on to somebody else. And this way we can keep it going. So I'm going to pass this on to Deidre.
Hello, everyone. Deidre Somerville, she, her, hers. I'm, as I have here, located in what's originally known as Kickapoo Territory, Peoria Territory in the Illinois area. And I've been a member of SCRA for, I guess, about 5 years now, since I began my PhD program at National Louis University. I've since graduated and completed my dissertation in 2019. I have been involved with mutual aid and or peer support related communities for many years, all pretty much based in community, in practitioner-based experiences for myself. I've been involved with the cooperative movement, the development of co-ops, particularly as relates to co-op development for Black, Indigenous, and people of communities of Black and Indigenous and people of color in the Chicago area and in the Bay Area while growing up. I have also been involved with now it's becoming more in vogue now, but I've been involved with the Isusu practice as well, which is also I consider a part of peer support. It is it's a credit institution that's community-based. We call it Passing the Pot. You find the practice all over the Caribbean, Chandas, and Latin America, but its origins are rooted in Nigeria. And so I'm a member and founder of NSUSU here in Chicago. And I've also been involved with the reevaluation counseling, or RC community, which is a peer counseling community that has been around for a number of decades. And I've been a member of Self-Help Mutual Aid, Self-Help Peer Support Group for, I guess about 3 years altogether. I've not been that very active until very, very recently for a while. So I'm glad to be back and glad to be connected with everyone again. And I will pass it to, Thomasina's, you're the next one on my screen. So if you don't mind, I'll pass it to you.
Well, I think I was introduced by Ron.
Yeah.
I've been around for a long time. I'm going to choose Francois Luziger.
Thank you. As I said last time, it's the worst name to say in English. It's all the sound that you don't have in English all in one in my name. So hi everyone, my name is Francois Luziger, and so I'm a PhD student from University of Montreal, University of Quebec in Montreal. I'm working at University of Sherbrooke as well, and my main interests are the role of the interpersonal relationship on recovery from mental illnesses and disorders. So I'm kind of a satellite in this group. I come and go sometimes. I'm not sure exactly what my interests are, but yeah, I'm here for the next hour. So I love the article that Louis sent us a couple of weeks back. That's really something I enjoyed. And I'm looking at developing different projects around programs evaluation of peer support for students in academia. So that's where I am at the moment. And I'm gonna pass the microphone to Ruth.
Hi, I'm Ruth Holman. I'm in Los Angeles, and I'm the founder, executive director of SHARE, the Self-Help and Recovery Exchange. We've been around since 1993, and we do all things self-help support group. And we're funded by Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, among others. And we employ, I think we're up to 48 peer workers. And we have a number of different programs. We have 2 self-help centers that have gone online during COVID, but before they were online, they each had 5 or 6 meeting rooms for self-help support groups. One of the centers is in the Skid Row district of Los Angeles. The other is in Culver City, that you may recognize from NPR if you listen to it. And we also have a peer respite that's also been shuttered because of the pandemic, but we run a 2-week introduction to self-help support groups and peer support, and basically get people away from I can't do anything and I'm entitled to everything, to I can do everything and I have basic human rights. And we also have a peer housing program where we create self-help support groups within single-family houses in Los Angeles, and we currently have 40 such houses, and can house anybody who wants to get off the streets or it doesn't like their living situation today. We make a point of opening houses at the same rate that we are filling them, so that we always have vacancies to make that work. So I'm here to, I've been a longtime member of this interest group, and am very much interested in making sure that we maintain the self-help support group aspect of it, in part because there's very little money to research self-help support groups anymore. And I don't believe that the people with the money should decide what people get, particularly when there's something so effective as self-help support groups that other people may call mutual aid groups or MASH or whatever they want to call it. Okay, that's me. And I'm going to choose Nola Butler Bird.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm not uncloaking this morning, but it's been too many weeks. I'm zoomed out. I'll be honest with you, I'm exhausted, but I wanted to be here this morning because I too think this is a really important topic. I'm in San Diego on Kumeyaay land. I direct the community-based block multicultural counseling and social justice education program at San Diego State University. I have been a member of SCRA for many years, since actually since you held a conference in Pasadena, California, probably back in the early 2000s. Although I have to admit, I have not been actively coming to conferences and stuff. I have participated in several of your online events and other things that have been going on lately. And the reason I decided to come was because my program is very community-based, and peer education has been part of my life for most of my life. I think it's a really important topic, and especially in light of everything that's gone on with COVID, and as well as the anti-Blackness and white supremacy issues that we've been dealing with as a culture. I think people need as much wraparound support as they can possibly get on multiple levels. I'm also a licensed professional clinical counselor, so I do believe in, professional support, but it's usually just not enough when we're dealing with so many issues. And so I'm really interested in this. I have to admit, I didn't realize the topic was going to be focused on the special interest group so much, as I just was really interested and glad to see that you had this as a topic of focus. And I'm here to find out what SCRA has been doing over the years focused on these specific issues. And so I guess I'd like to pass this to Petri Kapoor.
Thank you so much, Nola. And hello, everyone. I am from India, and I have been in the academia for over 4 decades. And it is only in the past 8 to 9 years that I have started trying to look at community outreach programs. And the first one I looked into was sexual health and hygiene. Working not only in schools and colleges, but also the urban rural areas of Delhi. And the next outreach program was on mental health. And what we must note is that in the Indian context, we have very few professionals. We have fly-by-night operators, yes, many of them. But when we look at that, the rate is very, very low. Keeping that in mind, I have started somewhat of a bridging, because the youth of today do not know how to reach out to the professionals. And there's a lot of stigma woven around this particular topic. So what we do is we are there on the media, social media, in terms of they can reach out to on a WhatsApp, on Twitter, on Instagram, so on and so forth. And because anonymity we find is very important, we only reach out through message-based outreach. We are not qualified to be counselors or psychiatrists. Hence, we are just a bridge where the youth reach out to us. We have some professionals on board and we direct them to that. We've also created a directory of all the counselors and psychiatrists in the Indian context who are also providing pro bono services. So the peer support that we are providing is run by volunteers, and these are students of psychology in second year, third year, or a master's program. So they are learning, they're experiencing basically what is happening on the field, in the field, so that they can take up clinical psychology maybe as a profession. Though, mind you, let me also share with you, getting admission to be a clinical psychologist is a very, very tough process. Hence, the role of NGOs, that is non-governmental organizations, play a very critical role in providing the service. So why I have come here is to be able to network, to be able to learn how do we provide the youth this particular peer support. I have tried, reaching out to psychiatrists, but nobody really has that interest, inclination, or even the time, I'm quite sure. I don't blame them because they have their hands full with this, with the COVID. And mind you, India is the depression capital of the world. And we, I'm sure, going towards many more problems. So what I seek is support from each one of you to be able to build up the support in the Indian context. So there are 2 NGOs that I work with. I can only provide them with mentorship. I'm a retired associate professor. So my basic, or rather my humble plea is that if I could learn from each one of you in some way or the other and provide the necessary peer support to my loved ones. I'm very passionate about my students and the youth of today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Preeti. Is there anyone you'd like to pass the microphone to?
Oh, okay. I'm not too sure who's Daniel. Can I pass it on to you, please?
Great. Daniel, are you here? Yep, here he is.
Yes.
Great.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Hello. So, right. So why I'm here to learn more about the self-help group, and just to learn everything about the community psych aspect to it. And so I'm a second-year graduate student in a clinical psychology program. And so, yeah, that's what I'm here.
Do you want to share your location?
California State Dominguez Hills. So that's, I'm in San Pedro. So it's like the harbor of Los Angeles.
We're in the same program. I just finished the program, my MA in health psychology, and Daniel and I are in the same, he's in the clinical psych track.
Oh,
Same program.
very
I'm really
cool.
happy to see you here, Daniel. I know you're only like 20 minutes away from me.
Yeah, nice to see you, John.
I'm glad we're doing these introductions. It's very interesting. Daniel, who do you would like to pass the mic to?
Well, how about Yadi?
Great.
Hi, that's me. You guys have met me already, so I am just I'll do a personal introduction as far as this goes. Within the vein of this, I started a community interest group, to generate basically people who had not been involved in political action before and were not sure how to get involved. We created a network of local grassroots organizations. And so we would then disperse that information out to the community. We have organized several large-scale protests and marches, and so part of that has been in this community support. I was really interested in what Deidre was saying about the Isusus. That was such a great like the type of thing that what we realized is that we, my co-founder and I, is that we didn't have the strength to do that, but we would find programs like what Deidre was saying and then push people to that, because that wasn't our strength, but our strength was being able to organize and create ways to help people find the opportunities in their local area. I'm in Los Angeles, and so, you know, within our local areas. So, and thank you, Daniel. I'm going to pass it off to Sarah, if you're there.
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm actually outside, but I don't know if it's not too loud. I can share now.
With those beautiful birds, it sounds amazing.
Yeah, do it.
No, it's the birds are tweeting and stuff. It's my only chance to get out. Sorry, you
It's
guys.
lovely. It sounds lovely.
It is. It is. It is. It's a nice day. I'm here in Chicago, actually, with the happy chirping birds and sunshine. And yeah, no, I haven't been recently because the meeting kind of conflicted with, unfortunately, with other work stuff. But I'm at University of Illinois Chicago, and I'm actually a rape researcher, interested in substance abuse and trauma, and as well as 12-step groups and support, informal support, just generally, kind of like not even in terms of my research, looking at kind of interventions to improve support to survivors as well as to those supporting survivors, and just looking at the role of that and how that plays a role in women's recovery, because most women don't go to formal sources or have mixed experiences. So I was coming to this group for a while, maybe with the past 2 iterations of people who shared it. I'm not remembering exactly, but when you guys were doing the statement and we were providing resources on the website and stuff, it's kind of like that. But I'm not, like, strictly speaking, done any community groups or this kind of stuff you guys have done, but I'm really interested in understanding in terms of how much we can, you know, connect people to that, especially I'm in a criminology department, and, you know, there's a lot of folks who do work on the carcerality of everything now, and how so much of the formal services are connected to the criminal justice system and really can be quite sort of punitive. And so I think it's really important to have more and more of these other alternatives. As somebody else said, I think the person who does share, and I've heard her speak before here, and I just know there's a lot of need out there. And so I'm always interested in learning as much as I can do and trying to do more research and whatever I can that helps to feed, you know, empirical information that helps to support these approaches, but also learn from, you know, what's going on the ground in reality where people live. So anyway, I'll stop there. It's good to be here.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Is there anyone you want to pass it on to, or I can choose someone for you?
Oh yeah, you can, Ron, thanks.
Okay, great. George, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity. So I'm George Brott, and I am in close by Macon, Georgia. This is the land of the, well, Creek or Muskogee or Cherokee or Seminole, depending on which group you think might have lived in this area previously. So I'm a licensed professional counselor, mainly because I had children instead of finishing a PhD in community psych. But perhaps most importantly, I'm a person in long-term recovery. And so that for me means 31 years ago, I made the decision to stop using all alcohol and other drugs And I'm also in recovery from 27 years in the criminal justice system as a counselor, program director, service provider, all that, reentry director, and all that kind of stuff. My role really is as a teacher or trickster, depending on which mythological meme makes sense to you. And I'm also a recovering psychology professor and a individual who has one leg in the behavioral health world, one leg in the peer recovery support world, and one leg in the recovery residence world. So trickster, you got to picture me with 3 legs, obviously. And part of what I've been able to do in my career because of my recovery is branch into a number of different areas. So I have facilitated and co-founded peer recovery support training in multiple states, beginning here in Georgia, which, by the way, was the first in the U.S. to start a peer support training that was certified for Medicaid reimbursement through the Georgia Mental Health Consumer Network. So this is, I've worked in multiple states, including South Carolina, Minnesota, and California, and others, developing peer recovery support services and trainings. And the interesting piece for me is the other thing I'm in recovery from is I've been part of APA since 81, that's 1981, and joined the community psychology division because I'm in recovery from being a physiological psychologist. So I went from physiological psych to community psych, opposite ends of the systems perspective, if you will. But the interesting thing today is that we are at a really important point in time where the administration in the US government is recognizing how peer recovery support services enhance and improve outcomes of traditional clinical services. And I will say that it would be really helpful for APA and our division to kind of be have a voice at the table to say, what does that mean? Because the funding is going to, I appreciate what Ruth said, the funding is going to be directed in certain ways. And the biggest challenge, as I see it, is how do we make space and funding available for this new kid on the block we call peer services, and allow the existing establishment, the hegemony of clinicians and doctors in particular, to allow this thing to live and breathe and grow without it being viewed as a threat. And there's only so much of the pie. I mean, there's only a pie, and we're trying to carve out a piece of it. And I want to recognize that there's sacrifice that will be necessary in order to make this evolving process work, so that we're expanding the services and improving outcomes. So it's within that domain that I do think peer support is different than clinical services, which is different than recovery housing and operating recovery housing, and which is different than operating a collegiate peer support program. And so it's multi-tentacled, and somehow we need to, I think it'd be advantageous to develop a structure that's able to support that diversity without it all having to be whitewashed, pun intended. And so this is a really significant point in time for us to be able to lift up what I believe will enhance the effectiveness and the cultural congruence of what we might call peer support, or self-help or mutual aid or whatever all the other terms are. So with that, I'll pass it on to Joanna.
Thanks. So yes, my name's Joanna Sawkins, and I just came along actually because I'm just sharing my work next week at the Biennale. I've not been involved with SCRA at all. I just a couple of weeks ago Googled basically my area of work that I do in the UK. And it came and your conference came up, and I thought, wow, well, I'm supposed to be making international contacts for my career and learning about myself through talking about what I do, and finding others to connect with. The topic today, I think that I just chose this event actually because I'm in the UK. It fitted with my time zone, and I wanted to go to something because I had a free afternoon. So that's honestly, I really didn't give it too much thought. But looking at it now, I was probably quite drawn to the word peer, because my work in the UK is focused around a practice called peer research. And I don't really like the term because it's caused so many problems, because you have to define what makes someone a peer to another peer. Like you have to really place do a lot of work to place boundaries of what makes someone a peer to another peer. And in the projects I was doing, it wasn't so clear cut, and it was becoming difficult. That said, I think in my own sort of life, communities of practice have been really important. So connect like this, I suppose, connecting with my own peers in a work context. So I wouldn't throw the term out completely at all, actually. Great. So with that, I'll pass over to Adriana.
Thank you, Joanna. My name is Adriana Rivas, and I'm here in San Diego, California. And I recently finished a master's in higher education leadership. And I'm here today to learn about the differences between the three topics. And I've been interested in pursuing a PhD program and have been looking in different places and or different kind of tracks, and somehow always circle back to community psychology. And I'm interested in Indigenous, Afro-Indigenous communities and community psychology and methods, and really taking a look at how it can be implemented. And so the three topics today are really interesting to me because I'm kind of a product of a family that has participated in kind of counseling and peer support. And so as an offspring of a mother who kind of went through that, I saw kind of blurred lines between these three groups. And as someone who's really interested in really providing help to the community or being a liaison, I think it's really important to see what capacity and what limits are within these roles, and learning about what those are. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Adriana. Is there someone you want to pass it on to? We have Ernesto, Luis, and Amber, I believe, has not introduced themselves yet.
Oh, you said Amber?
Yes.
Okay, how about Amber?
Great.
Hi, everyone. Amber Kelly, Executive Director of SCRA. One of the things that I love about my role is I get to learn about topics that I don't necessarily have a familiarity with. In terms of this particular topic, I have experience on the evaluator end in terms of evaluating programs, but not necessarily having an in-depth understanding from a content perspective. So I'm just interested in just learning from you all.
Great. And who do you want to pass it on to?
Let's see, who else is left?
Ernesto
have-
and Louis, I believe, are available.
I'll pass it to Louis.
Hi, everyone. Louis Brown here. I am an associate professor at the University of Texas Health Science Center, Houston. I work in health promotion and behavioral sciences, but I'm trained in community psychology and actually based in El Paso. I've been involved in this group since I was a graduate student back in 2005. And have done a fair amount of research work with consumer-run organizations and self-help support groups and peer workers with mental health. So happy to be here, and I'll pass it over to Ernesto.
Ernesto prefers to put his information in the chat. There's a lot of good stuff actually in the chat, so if you're not able to, I think that gets saved and recorded along with the Zoom session that will go onto the SCRA website at some point. I forgot to mention my interests. I'm an associate professor at the American University in Bulgaria. I do research on Oxford houses, which are a type of self-run recovery home for people recovering from substance abuse disorders. I did my dissertation in the US on Oxford houses, and I've been here since 2016 trying to get Oxford houses started here. There's one that's happening here right now, and we're gonna open up Oxford House number 2, hopefully this month, later on this month. So we'll see. And so my interest is in all of that, in self-help, mutual support, peer support, and how all these things come together. But I would admit I don't know very much about the areas of peer support. But I love doing international research and learning about how cultures influence what is recovery, what is peer support, what is mutual help, is recovery even possible? Which turns out to be a really big factor here in Bulgaria. Most people don't believe recovery is even possible. And a lot of mutual support depends on friendship. Here, friendship takes years to form, and trust takes years to form. In the United States, it is much more thin and elastic. So, that's why I'm here. Okay. Did I overlook anybody in their introductions? I think we've gotten everybody. Great. Nola brought up something important. If you don't know how to use the raise hand feature, or if it's not available to you, just turn on your mic and say, I'd like to say something. That would be totally fine. This is a very informal thing. Otherwise, if you have something to share, use the raise hand feature, or if your mic is on, physically raise your hand. And hopefully I'll see it. Thomasina, I don't know if you were taking notes, but everybody's introductions had quite a wide range of interest, from being well-heeled academics who have been in the field for a long time to people who are considering being academics. And almost everybody brought up a question or an implied question about what is peer support? How do researchers access information from peers? How does mutual help differ from peer support? How do all these things sort of come together? So I'm going to turn things over to you to if you don't mind, to make some commentaries and kind of get the roundtable discussion started.
Ron.
You're grimacing, so I'm thinking that's not a good sign.
I mean, I feel like I'm put on the spot. Yeah, I'm sorry you and I didn't coordinate more and connect. Well, let me say that unfortunately, from a perspective of a lot of you, I am coming from a really academic place, and I am very devoted to the 12-step 12 tradition groups to all the other like Recovery International and mental health. And the foundation of that self-help mutual aid, which started as a movement in the 1970s, I mean, realistically in the United States, was that it was voluntary, that it is non-commodified. That is that the basis of it is not making money or having money, and it often operates on a shoestring, and in order to avoid problems of prestige, money, and property getting involved in the way of mutual aid. Now, what I've seen in the years since I've started studying it was that when the government got involved, like in what George was talking about as an example, and I don't mean to, I'm not picking on George, the Medicaid funded peer support, which is the first in the United States. Every state has the capacity to develop licensed training for peers, mental health peers, and to get it, I don't know how it gets certified, but then the state program can license and certify peer support workers who can then get paid, reimbursed by Medicaid. So that's a big, big deal. But in the process, it, as so often happens when a government or an outside entity gets involved in self-help mutual aid, it became, in my opinion, kind of corrupted. And it's gotten very blurred. Like, for example, sometimes the definition of what a peer is that you have received mental health services. Well, I mean, that to me means you could have gone to a 10-session counseling, or you could have been in a locked ward of a mental hospital. I mean, it runs the gamut. So I'm disturbed because what I'm reading in the literature, and this is academic literature, research that's being done is finding out that instead of mutual aid being the basis of the peer support workers, kind of turning them into little peer clinicians, kind of half-baked, untrained clinicians, is the way that a lot of peer workers are being used, and a lot of the peer workers complain about it. So I'm concerned that the original self-help support groups, like Ruth is talking about, when it's translated into another venue, like government-funded programs, etc., it often loses its capacity, its veracity, its purity. I don't like that word, but so, and yet I think it's necessary. And how could we rehabilitate it to be useful? And so those are some of my concerns. I'm at the point of thinking that peer support has become so divorced from self-help mutual aid that it's almost like a different animal, as used, by government-funded peer workers that are. So I don't know. Ron, help me.
No, that's a good place to get us going. And I just want to read this first, and then I'll go to you, George, who has his hand raised. From Nola Thomasina, I agree. That has been a problem. Some sister professions block peer support workers from getting certifications. out of fear that they will undermine licensed professionals. And so corrupt is a strong word. I think, it just changes the orientation and the singleness of purpose when people start to get paid for the things that they do. It takes it out of the self-help realm. And so we'll go to George, who had his hand raised, and then go to Nola.
I just want to echo Tomasino's sentiments and say that one of the challenges is peer support. One of the cornerstones is this concept of multiple pathways, which is fine. And the tendency to provide peer services as an alternative to traditional self-help. So in other words, yeah, it's about helping people connect to whatever their indigenous or natural recovery pathways are. But in many cases, peer services are offered as an alternative. So instead of going to AA, NA, Celebrate Recovery, SMART, SOS, etc., come to our recovery support center and come to our groups and it's so how do we help people learn as a peer recovery support service provider to lean into and discover the indigenous resources that are culturally congruent for the individual while honoring those traditions that have really supported people within the culture for generations and for centuries. And so to me, that's one of the fundamental challenges. And it's different. Peer support is different than self-help or mutual aid. And so it's part of what we sometimes kind of struggle with in the trainings is to really differentiate. You're not a sponsor. You can be a sponsor, but if you're being paid, you're not a sponsor, nor are you a preacher, nor are you a doctor, nor are you whatever other roles you might have in life. And so it's helping. How do we help people figure out the method of connecting people back to their natural or their indigenous sources of support as a primary mode of intervention or interaction, and then offer alternatives subsequent to that if there are opportunities available to do it. And so it really is it's kind of the snake oil salesman saying, I have the cure for whatever ails you, regardless of where you are or where you think you're headed.
Okay, George, Ron, as co-host, I'm just going to intervene for a second and add a little bit to what George said. I completely agree. What a lot of people don't understand is that the foundation of the 12-step program or Recovery International is a very robust, complex program of recovery and self-help. They are not just whimsical things in the night. And in fact, I just found an article called The Neurobiology of the 12-Step Program. This is based in, yes, Ruth, I'll send it to you. So this is a very robust and a lot of peer support, what is called peer support, has no content base or very little content basis, right, George? That's all I wanted to add to what you said. I completely agree.
Thank you, Thomasina. We have Nola and then Ruth.
Thank you, everyone, for your sharing. I think this is really such an important topic. One of the things that has gotten on my nerves, though, from the get-go is the professionalization of the professions is also one of the problems that plays out in why peer and these other forms of support that are actually the old school forms of support in many of our cultures is that the money also goes with with the professionalization of the profession. Out here in the state of California, we had a heck of a time even getting the LPCC legislation passed because of our sister professions. You know, there's all this territoriality and folks wanting their, you know, their silo or whatever. And so peer support out here in California has really been stymied because of that dynamic. We can't even get the certification legislation through because of this dynamic. And sadly, because money is involved with it, many of the peer support programs don't get funded that well out here and have a hard time surviving. So I love the 12-step movement. It really helped my life and helped transform my life in so many ways, but it's also has a strong Eurocentric base to it too. And so figuring out how peer support, many times folks will rather go to that than to come to a psychologist or a licensed professional because there's still so much distrust in our communities having to do with as we've medicalized our professions, we've also alienated a bunch of folks. So looking at some ways to try to quit fighting amongst ourselves as professions would help us all, I think, in the end, and help our communities a whole heck of a lot.
Thank you, Nola. Ruth.
I've got 2 points. My first point is that we've run in, this interest group has run into the problems of the professionals being upset with, you know, not wanting stuff to happen. We spent time putting together a resolution when Obama first got in and was doing the ACA, whatever that stands for these days.
Affordable Care Act, yeah.
Affordable Care Act, there you go. And we got the resolution all put together to, you know, ask that they include self-help support groups in what was going on, and the APA shut it down so quickly it wasn't funny. So we've had that, this group has had that problem right away. The other thing that I see as a problem, and I didn't introduce myself, as one of the things that we do at SHARE is we train peer workers across California. And we call our program the Advanced Peer Specialist Training, so that people can see that it's totally different than other trainings that are offered. We have 300 people on our waiting list to get in to be trained, in part because we train on evidence-based peer practices, which, you know, this idea that because I have years of mental health experience receiving services, that in and of itself is enough to make me an effective peer worker is a very naive way of looking at things. And it also comes from that place of I'm entitled to a job, even though I have very little to offer. So, so I think that one of the things that I would like, if we bring in the peer worker people into this, you know, if we bring that in as a part of the interest group, is I would really like us to advocate for the peer interventions, one of which is the self-help support groups. There's peer bridging, there's recovery planning, there's listening and disclosing, the helper therapy principle. These are all evidence-based practices that every peer worker should have in their toolkit. But this idea that, no, we don't need a toolkit because I'm enough just the way that I am, and you have to pay me, and it doesn't matter that you want me to do case management, even though I haven't been trained to be a case manager, or facilitate therapy groups, even though I don't know how to do therapy. So those are my 2 points.
Thank you, Ruth. So I have my hand raised because several of you know this, but this idea of professionalism in self-help has been been grappled with for a long time. If you read the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, or AA Comes of Age, they were debating about these sorts of things in the 1930s. One of the founders was going to be paid to staff an addiction center in a hospital, an alcohol rehab center, and they eventually talked him out of it. And then soon, I think in the 1940s, Hazelden purchased a bunch of the documentation from 12-Step, the Little Red Book, some of the original written materials that was used in the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous, and professionalized it and wrote it and became a for-profit center. And there's still, if you, in some 12-step meetings you go to, and they talk about Hazelden, Betty Ford as being sort of this corruption of AA and the corruption of that sort of original idea of one person helping out another without economic gain. And so this debate has been going on for a long time in one form or another. And so we probably won't resolve it, but there's probably something to be learned from all these different approaches. I liked what George had to say about there's many different paths for how people get to where they need to go. And so, one of the things that I just don't know very much about is about the research of peer support versus, not versus, how it complements self-help, how these things sort of fit together, how they could most effectively fit together, and so on. And again, that's part of why all of us are here at this discussion right now. That's all I wanted to say. Any thoughts or reactions so far? Go ahead, Thomas.
Ron, okay, for me, it is now a reality that we have paid peer support, period. It's here, it's gonna continue. So the issue is, the 12 steps resolve the professionalization in a very definite way that won't work with paid peer support, that in effect discussing what Ruth was saying is not set up in a way to use the helper therapy principle, mutual aid, or these refined skills of listening. In other words, we need to find ways to live with the reality that it's paid peer support is here, but to transform it in a way that it's actually more supportive.
I guess.
And involves more mutual aid. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Great. George has his hand raised.
So one of the vital challenges. Oh, go ahead.
Would you agree, George, with what I said?
Oh, absolutely. And believe me, the dynamic changes the point at which you go from, it's important for my recovery that I give back and be of service, to now I get paid that changes the dynamic of that service. And so that kind of leads me to the other areas that I think could be explored under this umbrella. Is I like to make a distinction between supervision of peer services and the effort and attention needed for the professional development of peer service providers. So supervision is more about administrative oversight. Professional development is more about people being able to track their own improvements in their competence and confidence. And so that's often not even part of the conversation. It's an afterthought. And it often falls to clinicians or people in other professions to be the supervisor. And they think, well, what I ought to do with them is clinical supervision. Well, no, that's really not what's called for here. There's something else. And so all that higher level sort of operational professional development focus is not really even part of the conversation yet. And that could be something that this group really can become a champion for.
Okay, George, we have a study that was done. Lewis and Ruth, Lewis Brown, can you talk about aren't we getting findings from the study that was done on supervising peer workers?
Sure, yeah, I worked with Ruth on, they did an implementation of a series of trainings focused on improving the supervision of peer workers. And they trained both the supervisors and the peer workers in their training efforts together. And they focused on the best practices for peer support, and as well as, let me see if I can remember them all. It was a trauma-informed developmental model of supervision. What am I forgetting, Ruth?
The cultural competency of becoming an ally, that the supervisor became an ally to the peers within the agency, and seeing that their role was to champion the peer workers, and peer services.
Mm-hmm. And also an anti-stigma training.
Lewis, have you published or have you written up any of this? When is it?
So we're currently writing it up. The preliminary findings, we did get an abstract accepted to APHA. And that one, so it is a randomized trial, and we found at 12-month follow-up that there were improvements in the respect and appreciation for, I'm not using the right words, but something along the lines of respect and appreciation for peer support, and sort of like the extent to which that's valued within the organization. But we did not see changes in the levels of recovery amongst the peer workers themselves. And I think the trainings were helpful, but I don't know, kind of the concluding thought in the abstract was that more work needs to be done to get the practices implemented within the organizations. So that transition from training to everyday practice probably needs more focus. But I do, just to comment on the conversation in general, I think the fact that SHARE is, working so extensively in peer support and with peer workers now, it seems like a very natural extension of self-help support groups. And even though it is different and there are a host of challenges related to this paid role, it still seems like it can be well informed by unpaid peer support, and there's a lot of like cross education that would be of value.
Thank you, Louis. Nola, do you want me to ask for a volunteer for your question first, or would you like to comment?
No, you can go ahead and ask for a volunteer. Thank you.
Yeah, Nola put something very important in the chat. Can I have a volunteer for somebody who can give a succinct definition of peer support, self-help, and mutual aid? Thomasina, you've given sort of a first pass at what self-help is, which is unpaid, voluntary work of one person helping another in a specific field. If someone could contrast that with peer support, which appears to be paid, professionalized support for that specific field from somebody who also has experienced the same condition. And then mutual aid is groups of people getting together to help each other recover from those same things. Did I miss anything in those three definitions? I volunteered myself, by the way.
Thank you.
Great, Nola, go ahead.
Yeah, my question though is that okay, so we use the term evidence-based, but when you look at the vast majority of the evidence-based stuff is still there's not a lot of real evidence. The only thing that they've really been able to demonstrate is that the therapeutic alliance, or the relationship between whoever is doing the work with the person, tends to be something that across all of the fields seems to be the only thing that we can really say that we really have enough evidence about. So my question is, and that's a challenge for us, because we really need to look at the outcomes of the folks that need the services or the support. And I don't think we're doing nearly enough of that to really assess how well any of our fields are doing. And it just feels like these three areas, the peer support, the mutual aid, they end up being like, well, to be honest with you, those with the least amount of power, and we have the most control over. And so I just want to challenge us to look at that dynamic, because it's a power play that I don't think is doing much good for any of us, because then we have the MDs in the medical profession looking down on all of us. And if we're pitting ourselves against each other, that's not going to help the people or the communities that we're really hoping to serve and support, and it's not going to help our professions that much either.
Yep. Thank you. That's a great point. I have my hand up, and then George. One of the things during this discussion, it is not an unusual career track for someone to go into a 12-step group as a recovering alcoholic, or who maybe dropped out of college, or maybe never went to college, or even dropped out of high school, get back on their feet and decide that they want to become an addictions counselor, and go and get training and do that, and then become a person who does that. I know scores of people who have gone sort of this career track, and one of the questions that I always ask is, how do you differentiate this from being a sponsor, going to a 12-step and volunteering? They say, when I go into this building to do this work, that's and I get paid for this, I'm no longer a sponsor. I'm no longer a person who I'm not. Sometimes I reveal that I'm a person in recovery, because that's part of the job. I have to provide peer support, but that's where that stops. And then when I do go into a meeting, this is when I put on that hat, right? And so that's how they differentiate. But I just want to make that very often people start in 12-step and they become a peer counselor, and that's something that they desire to do. And so I want to say, George, and then Ruth. And oh, I'm so sorry. I said that we were going to take 5-minute breaks on top of the hour. I've missed that by 25 minutes. So maybe at the bottom of the hour, in about 6 minutes, we'll take a 5-minute break and then come back if we need to. But this is a really wonderful and great discussion. So George and then Ruth, please.
So I just want to reiterate the point that for me, the difference between a sponsor and a peer recovery support service provider is that the sponsor has an allegiance to a particular recovery pathway, whereas a peer recovery coach has to learn how to sustain their allegiance to their recovery pathway or ways, but be able to help other people find what may be very different, if not the opposite, of their recovery pathway. So, and as a recovering academic, I also want to throw out the challenge to this group of let's move beyond the antiquated notion of evidence-based practices. I'll just pause for that. 2, how about we prioritize practice-based evidence, which gets back to the notion of providing performance support as a component of supervision.
Great. Let that sink in.
I didn't quite get that. Can you say a few more words about that, George?
So it's and I know, I get it. It's our field is obsessed with practice-based evidence, which is a whitewashed way of saying you can only use stuff that has been approved because it's been researched, and therefore those people who develop the technique get paid to teach you how to do it.
No, I think you meant you just reversed it.
Yeah, you meant the opposite.
So the other side of that is, instead, if we put the premium on developing practice-based evidence of effectiveness, it's about teaching people how do you collect the information, both process and outcome metrics, that can inform whether or not the service you're providing, A, is working, and B, is it getting better over time? Are your outcomes and processes improving over time?
Gotcha.
Okay. Well, I agree with that. I think that one of the major problems in mental health is that nobody's looking at the outcomes. They're looking at the number of people they've served. They're looking at what their caseloads are, if it's more or less. They're looking at stuff like that, and they never look at what comes out on the other end. One of the things about all of our, in terms of what Ron was saying about, it's very common for people to come through a self-help support group and then go on to a professional peer worker type thing. All of SHARE's employees have to have at least 1 year of self-help support group experience, and they have to, we have a really odd or effective, whichever way you want to call it, way of hiring people, where we have to assess whether through their recovery process they have a way of dealing with a setback, that something happens and they know how to use their recovery to get back to a better place with it. And that's we call it a recovery process. And we have to look and figure out, does that recovery process work with them, or do they immediately get into a power struggle with whoever they're working with and can no longer join that person because they've been triggered about something? So one of the things that we very much want written into peer certification is that everybody should have experience with self-help support groups, because that way, even if they hate them, they still will be able to point people to them who could benefit from them, rather than, as George was saying, have everybody go down the same path that they did, you know, that so the Department of Mental Health can't figure out why SHARE is able to hire effective peer workers and they're not. And really the difference is that our peer workers are actually in recovery because they have used any number of self-help support groups to get to a place that they can pick themselves up and move forward, and therefore know how to talk to somebody who hasn't yet learned how to pick themselves up and move forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Ruth. I'm going to choose this time to take a 5-minute break. According to my clock, it's 31 minutes past the hour. I know in India, it's at the top, just one past the hour. So, but let's meet back here in 5 minutes, if that's possible. That would be great.
And we don't hang up, right? We just leave.
Nope, just leave it on. Just you may want to turn the camera off and your mic off if you're going to make noise.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm going to pause the recording for these 5 minutes, and someone remind me to turn it back on. We'll see you in 5 minutes. Thanks.
Means to kind of see each other with a lens that's not so kind of flattened by what sometimes we see as kind of misunderstanding or whatever, or something that's not evidence-based, because much of what I do is not evidence-based. RC has been around for a long time, you know, for decades, and it's and very, very suspicious of researchers. And likely will not have, and people liken it to a cult. You know, I've seen, if you look up reevaluation counseling, kind of similar, kind of like what you talked about, Ron. If you look up reevaluation counseling, one of the questions that comes up is it a cult? Which is you know, I think bears to the suspicions that people have things that are not evidence-based, right? That haven't gone through this rigor that people use to validate whether something is good or not good for someone, and or potentially dangerous to someone. So there's a lot undergirding some of the ways that the language of evidence-based has impacted this insider-outsider discussion about what we should include and define as part of this idea of what peer support, not peer support, but mutual aid and self-help is, and whether people elect themselves to be labeled or part of that movement. Although, because I can see myself as a bridge, I see the connections with the SUSU as surely as part of mutual aid. But many people who are practicing their SUSU aren't trying to make a point to be a part of a larger movement of mutual aid. They're just doing what they need to do for themselves based on, you know, many years of tradition and passing that tradition on. And so there's a lot of, to me, there's a lot of undercurrent to a lot of these questions that we're talking about. I just wanted to bring to the surface for us to talk about a little bit.
No, it's a really great point, and I'm glad you got your comment in before you leave. You know, with Oxford Houses, and for those of you who don't know, Oxford Houses are self-run recovery homes, mostly in the United States, but there's some in Canada, Australia, and in other parts of the world. And there, if you're familiar with AA, if AA provided housing, it would look something like Oxford House, because nobody owns the houses, right? They're rented from someone. They're self-governing. There's no authority within the house, so they're a little bit like a 12-step group. They're voluntary, and there's no actual recovery program in the house itself, but it is mutual support because people share spaces together. They need to maintain the house together. They need to pay for it together, and so on. But there's no. They have I think 7 traditions. I should know this. But one of the traditions is not anonymity. And so they have a yearly convention. And very often I graduated from DePaul. DePaul sets up a booth at their conventions about doing research. And there was an early, early collaborations between the founder, one of the co-founders of Oxford House's Paul Malloy, and Lenny Jason, my mentor, to produce a fair amount of evaluation research of Oxford House. But Oxford House is owes a lot to the mutual help, to the 12-step model. I mean, you read the literature. I mean, it's called Oxford House World Services, the central organization, which is AA World Services. And so they borrow a lot. They have a set of traditions, they have a set of rules, and so on. So there's a tremendous amount of that they owe the 12-step movement. But they don't advocate. They have 3 basic rules. Democratic governance. You must pay your fair share. All things are made democratically, and if you use drugs or alcohol, you have to leave. Right? AA has none of those things, and so there's a very strict difference between that particular brand of mutual help and self-help, which is. I've also heard this idea that 12-step is a cult, and cults are very hard to get into, and they're very hard to get out of. From the people that I know who've gone in and out of 12-step programs, it's very easy to get into it, and it's very easy to get out of it, right? And so that's one of the main differences.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. Thomasina, your connection's a little flaky, so go ahead if you need to speak.
Yeah, I'm sorry about my internet connection. Yeah. I just want to say Oxford House is an evidence-based practice. Oxford houses have probably been the most researched. I mean, second to Alcoholics Anonymous. Leonard, Jason, and Joseph had a collaborative research relationship at DePaul University with Oxford houses for over 20 years. I bet Ron, you probably know, there are probably 200 or 300 peer-reviewed journal articles that are about Oxford House research.
Yeah, there is about that. Yeah, but that's a good example of what George was saying earlier. That was practice based, and they existed for a long time without any evidence whatsoever until they decided to produce evidence. And they even got funding from the federal government before there was a lot of evaluation research of Oxford House with the Drug Abuse Act in the 1980s. And so that's maybe a good example of, George, if that is what you mean, of practice-based evidence where something happened before that. And AA is like that as well. AA existed for a long time before there was any evidence whatsoever that it worked, other than anecdotal sort of evidence, right? George put in the chat, I'm curious about ideas around the goals of the interest group for incorporating peer support. Thomasina, do you want me to, I can read the current mission statement of the group and share a bit about what the proposed mission statement is. I think it's a good transition to that.
Yeah.
Great. So here is the, I'm actually going to put in the chat a link to the original mission statement. of the group, but I'll read it for everybody. You don't have to look this up. But the original mission statement is this. It's very short. The Self-Help Mutual Support Interest Group is an international organization of researchers, self-help leaders, and policymakers that, one, promotes research and action related to self-help/mutual support groups and related initiatives, and two, provides a forum for interested researchers, self-helpers, and service providers to communicate and network. So that's the current mission statement of the IG. And one of the things that came out of our last meeting with this topic of perhaps expanding this to include peer support, we formed a committee to revise the mission statement. And so I'm just going to read. It's pretty short. It's about a page that Thomasina has worked on to put this together. Thank you, Adriana. Thank you for being here. So there's a set of principles, values, and terminology that's at the beginning of the mission statement. I could actually share this. Why don't I do that? Share screen. Great. And so you should be able to see this Google Doc here. I could give you a tutorial, Thomasina, on Google Doc right now, but I won't. And so the values, principles, and terminology, what I've highlighted here: respect for individual, peer, and groups' lived experiences of condition and recovery and personal development. Respect for social and behavioral science research and practice knowledge of self-help mutual aid groups and peer support. This is a bulleted list. Researchers and practitioners of self-help mutual aid groups or networks, peer support, and spin-offs such as Oxford House or sober living recovery residences. These are something that we value. Value of peer supporters, persons with lived experiences of the focal issue, such as mental health, and of recovery or personal improvement. And respect for self-help mutual aid communities of practice as a means for healing and rebuffing various forms of oppression, social and leisure clubs, cooperative practices, and study groups. And so moving down, the constituency of the interest group. Historically, the interest group was composed primarily of community psychology and other social and behavioral science researchers, and a few practitioners who paid dues and belonged to the Society of Community Research and Action. The recent primary activity of the IG, of quarterly conference calls or Zoom visits in the past few years, has also attracted participants with lived experiences of mutual help and self-help aid groups or peer support, and two-hatters, people who worked in both areas, individuals with professional degrees and knowledge from lived experience. The latter group may or may not be dues-paying SCRA members. It is an open question whether members of the interest group have to join SCRA and pay membership dues or not in order to vote on a new chair, for example, or whether we can continue the informal situation now with quarterly telephone or group meetings or some other combination. We'll talk, I think we answered that partially today. You don't have to be a member of SCRA, but you can pay to be part of the conference for one day if you want to participate in the group. The current IG mission, I just read that. So the suggested wording of the new mission statement is this: forum for encouraging, promoting, and assisting research and practice of self-help mutual aid groups and peer support. Encourage critical analysis, evidence, or experience-based discussion of emerging trends in research and practice of mutual help and mutual aid and peer support. especially highlight the value, usefulness, and limitations of individuals and groups' lived experiences of their focal problem, recovery, or personal improvement. Highlight the value, usefulness, and limitations of voluntary, non-commodified, or non-monetized self-help, mutual aid, and peer support. Emphasize the value, usefulness, and limitations of participatory and service user consumer-based research. Highlight value of the exchange of interdisciplinary practice, knowledge, and ideas that can lead to new interest in self-help. Place to explore emerging trends in theory and practice. Place to explore the various communities that have used self-help and mutual aid practices to improve individual and community wellness.
Ron, I was just tossing out ideas. I didn't mean that as a coherent wording for
No,
a mission statement,
no,
but ways of thinking about it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But again, to spur the discussion that we're having here.
May I say personally that after this conversation, I'm more convinced than ever that we need to separate peer support as a term from self-help mutual aid or self-help support groups. And kind of to distinguish peer support as the monetized form that is showing up all over the place.
Mm-hmm. So we would always include those three terms within the group. Is that what you mean, that we would?
In my opinion, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yes, that we would always say peer support separately. Yeah.
Great. Self-help, mutual aid, and peer support. Yeah. Any other comments or questions about this?
I'm wondering what the reaction is to the notion or the idea, the suggestion of changing self-help from a lowercase s to an uppercase S as a nod to the transcultural notion that we're all connected. And so it's about the value of emphasizing human connections within the culturally congruent organizations and people that support ongoing recovery. And I'm saying big R recovery, not little r. I mean, it's a Jungian idea, but it's older than that. It's in indigenous cultures, that this notion of there's this spirit part of us and we're all connected, as opposed to self-help being just about AA, NA, and all the other elements that have grown out of that. Just a thought.
Yeah. I think the term self-help has always been a little problematic. And I think that's probably why I always call it mutual help, right? To sort of emphasize that it is this, this group process.
Yeah, it's very awkward, but I always say self-help mutual aid because I really think that they are separate and combined. In other words, that the self-help, it's a lot of mutual aid does not involve self-help, but we're a lot of what we're talking about with the groups, the mutual aid and also involves self-help. Namely, individuals are self-determining. The group doesn't decide what you do, as in a cult. In a cult, this group decides what you do. In a self-help mutual aid group, the individual is self-determining, but within a context of interdependence with other people.
Yeah.
which to me is captured by big S self-help in the Jungian sense of the term.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That doesn't have the same meaning for me, so I don't know how to react.
Nobody I know who goes to a self-help support group calls it mutual aid. So I think we need to at least maintain self-help in there. I call it self-help support groups because when I call it support groups, people want to have a paid professional in there leading the group. And I think that there's something very different having all leadership shared and rotated without somebody in charge who has authority.
Related to that, this is a little bit more of a free form discussion, which I don't mind. Related to that, Ruth, there's a lot of groups out there who call themselves self-help and or mutual help or mutual aid groups, like 12-step houses, halfway houses, who call themselves that, but really are not. There is an authority there. They can kick you out for non-violation of the house rules. And this is what we were talking about before with power dynamics and stuff like that. But if you ask them, no, we are a self-help group, right? We help each other, and we are a mutual aid group because we're a group process. So it's like, well, there's bosses here.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but this terminology problem is just, I mean, everyone by definition of being in a democracy can define things the way they want. I mean, and in my case, I'm just, this is where I really am the academic, because I have to carefully define things for purposes of research.
Yep.
But, I mean.
Yeah. But getting people to attend an IG meeting in Zoom and have a slightly different perspective, I think is great, right? Because I want to hear what they think. I want to hear their perspective. I want to hear what they think their group is and what their group does and what they are. To generate that discussion. I think that's the point. One of the points of the IG, as you've put in this draft, is to exchange that kind of information. I can make this a little bit bigger if you'd like, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Usually down on the bottom on the right.
Yeah.
Or just go up to where it says 100%, click on that down triangle, and you can change it to 250% if you like.
Oh, yeah. Great.
Or 200. Yeah, there you go.
Mm.
Maybe 150 is better.
Yeah.
Great.
Can we change the IE to EG? You read it EG up above, and I think EG is much better than IE, because I don't want us only to talk about mental health groups.
Okay.
I think it was up on the values.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I didn't intend for it to be strictly. Yeah, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Great.
And I'd like to hear any other reactions from people. What needs to be added? What do they like? Do they like anything?
I would just put the first for the mission statement. I would just add an international forum. or a worldwide forum for encouraging
Okay,
and assisting.
international, let's say, yeah, international.
Because Preti, you know, I want her and people like her to be part of the group.
Right, right.
And if people want me to scroll down, you probably don't need to see the current.
So how do we get capital P psychology to accept the legitimacy of this approach and this focus? I mean, and I'm sorry for the pessimism in the question. But it's the community focus and how vital that is. It's not about changing the individual that gets us where we want to go. It's recognizing the contextual or the environmental elements that also contribute to an individual's behavior. And this is a good mission statement to the extent that it gets recognized as being valid by the larger community. Otherwise, we're just a little cult out there running around.
So this is not my here, I'll turn on my video, my area of study at all. But one thing that I have noticed, or at least I truly believe, is when you're talking about including understanding of contexts, you know, and how important that is in the, you know, in treating mental health issues, is that I know from the program I'm in, for instance, that our Masters of Social Work, but also the MFT program is housed in the Department of Education, as opposed to within the Department of Psychology. So one of the things they're not getting is they're not getting any critical race theory teachings. They're not taking community psychology. They're not learning about contexts. And these are, you know, the front line, and especially for, if we're talking about groups that these are, the disadvantaged groups are seeing the counselors that are put out from my, you know, the therapists from the programs at the state schools, like where I'm at. And I think it has to start there with a recognition. They're being, that you have a lot of people who are out there in the field doing treatment who are only doing, you know, what you guys are saying, the evidence-based practice that they're being taught, but they're not being taught about contextual implications. Like I said, critical race theory, you know, all sorts of those issues. And I think that that is a place to start. I think that you need to house people who are doing psychological work in departments of psychology and include those items in their education.
George, I'm very pessimistic too. We live in such an individualistic culture, and it's even more so with the current or the previous political climate. We are so individualistic.
I just want to read what Ernesto put in the chat. I always like to bring everything back to the ecological model to help us understand more fully context of individuals. Cool. I mean, thank you. So my perspective as an American in Bulgaria, your comment about individualism, Thomasina, is well founded. But here's the thing. We talk about everything here, at least in the United States, right? There are things, you know, there are things that I cannot even talk about here, or that nobody talks about in public, like addiction, right?
Like what? Like
addiction, whether you have it, had it, recovered from it. AA in Bulgaria is still very underground. Imagine what AA was like in 1940. That's about what it's like here in Bulgaria, right? There's no flyers, there's no anti-drinking campaign. I'll never forget when I first came here to do my research on Oxford Houses, I had a policy. I told everybody that I was doing research on addiction. I'll never forget getting into a taxi cab, and the taxi cab driver spoke English. Oh, what are you doing here? Oh, I'm studying, I'm a psychologist. I study addictions. And he says, oh, they should just be shot. Just shoot them. And my training as a community psychologist, and as Ernesto brought this up, the ecological model. So I did the next thing I was trained to do. Why do you think that? I asked him. And he said, nobody recovers from addiction. Nobody gets well, right? And so you're just putting the family through suffering and so on. And so it would be more merciful to have. And I said, well, that's great. You know that we elected a president twice who was an admitted alcoholic and coke addict, right? George W. Bush. And he said, yes, that's in the United States. Here in Bulgaria, things just don't change. And that was really an important conversation for me, because I realized if you've never seen something happen, you don't believe it's possible, right? And so when we're talking about doing these things, it's not just setting up an Oxford House in Bulgaria, it's changing the culture, right? It is getting that news out eventually. And I recall, the history of AA, that first article in this Saturday Evening Post, that changed everything for AA. For the first time in the United States, people thought, wow, recovery is possible for this. And then that changed, right? And so the other thing I realized is that in the United States, change is our culture. That is what it's about, right? It is talking about these things and reinventing things every 10 years or so, right? And it's painful to do that, but we're actually, my perspective from Bulgaria, we're actually pretty good at it, right? And it makes me optimistic about that, about how change being possible. Here, it's like, yeah, in 60 years, maybe you'll get this done. And it's like, I'll be dead in 60 years. And so, but that's, that's okay. I'm training other people to do this kind of stuff. And so, and I really like this term as I think about it more and more, George, about practice-based evidence, right? You got to have something that works in rotation, right, in order to be able to look at the evidence and so on. I don't know, and I go to when I come back to the US, I'm sorry, I'll finish with this. When I come back to the US and I talk to people in AA or people in Oxford houses, I do research on that in Bulgaria, and I say, but it's unclear whether or not it'll work there. And people always say, why wouldn't it work? And I said, where do you want me to start? Right? First of all, people don't live in houses here in Bulgaria. They live in these little 2-room apartments, right? How do you get 8 people to live in a 2-room apartment, right? People don't believe, just believing all these beliefs, these cultural things really have a huge impact. I mentioned a little bit about friendship, right? And you can walk into an AA meeting and, Americans, because our relationships are so shallow, we can raise our hand and say, yes, I'm so-and-so and I'm this person, right? We don't care. Here, it's so shame-based, right? And people don't do that in a meeting. And it takes years for some people to admit to a group of strangers, right? And so in Oxford House, you stay out of my stuff, I'll stay out of your stuff. Great. I don't have to like you, but I'll live with you. That does not happen here in Bulgaria. And so those are all these different perspectives make me optimistic about this in at least in the United States, because we're talking about it. And that's the whole purpose, I think, of the IG, is to talk about it. Get people in a room and talk about this stuff.
That's
The-
really interesting, Ron. I appreciate you sharing that.
Ron, I wish you would write some of this up for the TCP.
I did.
Well, no, but I mean more. I mean, you know more. It warrants more now.
Yeah, it's in development for sure. It's in development for sure.
Well, so part of what I'm suggesting is when we look at this mission statement, beyond it having internal validity, does it have external validity within our own organization, the society and APA writ large? And I
Yeah.
don't see anything in here about community, except until we get down to that last statement.
Well, one of the earlier discussions a couple meetings ago for the IG was that a lot of peer groups, they're not academic, they're not part of SCRA, and deliberately so, because they feel that those groups just don't add anything to the peer support world, right? So they have their own world of how that works, and they don't need these formalized structures. And they think that we're paid professionals, and so we are influenced by that. And so why should peer support trust us when we have our influence, right? Our own corruption, right? So that was one of the things that came out of that. And Ernesto wrote in the chat, because something might not be evidence-based, does that mean that something is not effective? I agree, there's too much focus on what is evidence-based in praxis. And Amber shared about how communitypsychology.com, great way to place to share work. Yeah, we solicit articles for that in the TCP at every IG meeting. So bringing something in about community, I'll put a comment in here. Just more about communities.
And the real intention here would be to connect this interest group to SCRA and to APA.
Well, I don't understand what you mean by that, George.
So
I mean, we're a part of SCRA. The interest group is a part of SCRA, and SCRA is, in a sense, a part of APA. So I don't understand what you mean.
So in looking at the mission statement, there's nothing that says to me, oh, you're part of the community psychology division, or you're even part of the American Psychological Association. In other words, we know it, but if I'm an outsider looking at this and saying, do I want to join this group? I'm not sure it accurately reflects the underpinnings of what the organizational support would be for this organization, for our organization.
Yeah. I think a worry is that if you do put that in there explicitly, non-psychologist practitioners, people who are part of self-help mutual aid groups, and they say, oh, I'm not a psychologist. I don't have any of this training. Should I even join this? This sounds like it's for professionals.
Yeah.
And I'm not
You're right.
So that was a little bit of the flavor that we got from the peer support discussion, that we're not academics. We don't want to be academics. We're not going to be academics. So we've been going for 2 hours and 24 minutes, but who's counting? You know, I've accomplished everything I wanted to do in this roundtable, which is to get everyone in a room, getting some interesting conversations happen, to talk about the mission statement, and to get feedback on that from people who know and care about it. And
I'm really glad, Ron, that we had everybody introduce themselves a little bit at the beginning. I think that was very, very helpful.
Very, very much.
Kind of, yeah.
You're right about that. What else needs to be said?
Well, I mean, I would like to hear from some of the people that have been quieter. Could we ask, and as we leave, for them to make some kind of statement, if, you know, either about the new mission statement or about what they've gotten out of this, if anything? I mean,
yeah. So Marcia is here. I'm glad she had joined a little bit late. Miranda, we have not heard from. Erica, I'm not calling on people. I'm just encouraging you. We would love to hear what you have to say, even if if you think that we're totally off base. I think that would also be very helpful.
Yeah. Shall we go back to seeing everybody?
Yeah, I'll stop sharing.
Okay.
I'll start because I have no problem talking. My mom used to joke that I could talk to a brick wall and make it talk back to me. So I wanted to say that, again, this is not a topic that I have much experience in, but I've really learned a lot. You know, I'm a researcher, so like I'm like evidence-based, you know, and then, but I can see, for me, this is a really eye-opening experience to be able to look at things on, you know, on a wider, more spectrum basis. I always like that idea of looking at things more as a spectrum than a yes or a no. And I think that I got a lot out of this today. I'm really glad that I appreciate you guys and your guys' time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Miranda, nice to see you. Welcome. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. And Marcia and Erica, Ernesto is doing great in the chat, but Daniel as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry I first off came a bit late. I'm in Paris right now too, so my time change is a bit different. And I must have did the miscalculation on my calendar. But from what I did get to hear, and especially about Professor Harvey's work in Bulgaria, was really interesting because I come from a background of anthropology. And so we're also asking questions about how ideologies and cultures shape people's behaviors. And so there's always an interesting parallel to community psychology, because we're kind of asking similar questions in anthropology. And I guess my question for Professor Harvey, and, you know, a more broader question, is if you engage with or have like local informants in Bulgaria who provide more insight into what life is like as a Bulgarian growing up and living in Bulgaria, and how, you know, what you can find out about certain ideologies that might be that might give an unexpected answer to why addiction is so hard to talk about in Bulgaria.
The answer is to your question is yes. I do have lots and lots and lots of local informants. I'm grateful every single day for them, and part of it is Bulgaria used to be. The attitudes about addiction is a holdover from Soviet times when addiction didn't officially exist, right? And mental health disorders was a punishment, right? You were committed as part of a prison sentence. So this whole idea of what mental health is hugely stigmatized, because not because there's something wrong with you, but the government said there was something wrong with you. The official authority said there was something wrong with you, and it was punishment. And it was not only was that geared towards the individual, it was also geared towards the family, because this family did something wrong. And so there was this idea of collective punishment. And so young people, I'm happy to say, do not feel this way. They have a much more cosmopolitan view about mental health, but their parents do. Their parents still have this old sort of thing. So that's it's a big holdover. And so when I mentioned it takes 60 years, what they're talking about is 3 generations for this to go away.
Mhm.
That's really what they're talking about. And I understand that and appreciate that. But you know, but there are problems built in that as well. There's a huge brain drain happening. Most young people in Bulgaria, they want to get an education so they can leave Bulgaria. And so that complicates things quite a lot. Bulgaria has dropped in population and will be they'll lose half their population, you know, by 2050. And nobody knows what's going to happen. There are whole villages that are completely abandoned in ghost towns.
Wow.
And so it's a group of older retirees and pensioners, and you know, the young people tend to want to leave. And so I like to joke there are more Marxists in the United States than there ever will be in Bulgaria, right? And so a lot of what's, but again, I'm giving a talk next week about Fulbrights and the value of international research and scholarship, because you just learn, you know, it just stretches your brain so much. I hope that answers your question.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you'll learn about this, and I think, yes, community psychology and anthropology is very, very closely related, particularly doing, you know, that's what context is.
Yeah.
I'm a cultural anthropologist.
Yeah. So
And-
yeah, you're well prepared for this.
And Ron, I think of, you know, I've been involved, I'm a sociologist. I've been involved with community psychology for 30 years. Community psychology is applied sociology.
Yep. Yep. Or psychological social work, one of the two.
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
either way it works.
At one point there was an applied anthropology. The conference was not only the community psychologists, but it was also that's how I got here, it was also applied anthropology. And a community psychologist asked me, you know, what's the difference between applied anthropology and community psychology? And I said, well, I think we look at the noble savage, you know, we look at the person who is different from us and see something that is positive and okay, whereas the community psychologist still has this idea that the person with a mental health issue is less than, you know, it's not, they still have this hierarchy of mental health, whereas the anthropologist is looking, you know, how does this person fit into the society and doesn't lose the basic, you know, it's sort of without the stigma was my answer to him.
This is just FYI, that might be of interest to Amber as well. You know, I teach community psychology at my university, American University in Bulgaria. These are all English-speaking students. About half are from Bulgaria, and the other half are from other countries in the region. So Albanians, Romanians, Ukrainians, Russians, et cetera, et cetera. And then we're getting more and more from Central Asia and Vietnam, all former communist countries, right? And so I don't teach, I call it the psychology of social change, because community psychology to them translates to something more like communism. And so it has that sort of flavor to them. And as I teach community psychology, as an American standing in front of this group, and I put Martin Luther King on, and Gandhi, and all these huge giants of community psychology, every year this happens. Students say, weren't those guys shot? And I say, yes. And they say, if we go back to our countries and do what you tell us to do, we'll get arrested and maybe shot, right? And so I realized just how US-centric from that 60s cultural, countercultural founding of community psychology, just how US-centric it is. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what am I asking these kids to do, right? And so,
why do they speak English?
Why? Yeah. English is the ticket out. English is the ticket. It's the international language. I'm sorry to say this. Again, this is what you get in Bulgaria. Students say, well, you got to learn English to be successful in the world.
Interesting.
Right? And so,
even though more of the population speaks Mandarin than English.
Yes, but in international conferences,
but I think English is regarded as the international business language. I mean,
yep.
And also all the academic stuff is in English.
Yeah, the science.
You know, because because the US and Australia and the United Kingdom have all had a very strong research-oriented way of looking at stuff. If you want to be part of the academic discussion, you have to speak English. Yeah. I mean, I did my field work in Thailand, and one of the anthropology professors there told me he tells all his undergraduates, if you want to do anthropology, major in English.
Wow.
So this, you know,
if you
again,
want to go to graduate school in anthropology, major in English is what he would tell them.
And so lots and lots of terms just have a very different feel here. Colonialism, you know, the Bulgarians will always tell you, yeah, we were under the Ottoman yoke for 500 years. That's what colonialism is. And it's like, no, it's white Europeans doing this. They say, no, this is what it is. Or the Soviet times, you know, that's what colonialism is.
It's much older than that.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. And I, you know, just in my field of addictions, the reason, and here's the real valuable thing, Miranda, and I hope you have the same experience in France. Because of what I know doesn't work in Bulgaria in terms of recovery, makes me a better researcher of what does work in the United States. You know, how middle-class housing availability makes Oxford House possible, right? Did they design that? No, they didn't design that. It's just part of what's going on there. the AA infrastructure that is in every single city in the United States. Did Oxford House design that? No, it's just there, right? The Fair Housing Act, you know, the Americans with Disabilities Act, did they do that? No. Those things don't exist anywhere in the world. And so Americans are very surprised to say the United States is probably the best place in the world to get to be in recovery, right? So Americans are going, no, we're shit with it. We do shitty in everything. Like, no, there were some systems that were built that work pretty well.
We're better than Canada. I'm like,
even in Canada, yeah. Well, there's an interesting twist in Canada. So people, because it's National Health Services, right? People want to go into recovery. does the National Health Service support that? And the answer is they encourage it, but they can't support it, right? And I see George doing the, yeah. And so can they pay for Oxford houses? No, they shouldn't, right? And so it's interesting. Oxford houses in Europe, there's a number of places here where they've created one. In the UK, there's one. In Sweden, there's one. In Bulgaria, there's one. And so it's easy to create one Oxford, that's the joke. It's easy to create one Oxford house in these countries. Creating two or the network, it's really hard. There's a lot, and I can give you all the reasons why they're really hard. But that's the really interesting thing about doing international research, because it shows you the structures that make it possible in other places.
Ron, I had a Fulbright to Canada, and that on the surface looked so similar to the United States, and you really had to be an anthropologist, and you really had to look in depth, because it turns out, yes, there's similarities, but there are some very fundamental differences because of the values, the political system, the National Health Service, et cetera, et cetera. And that was equally eye-opening, that I kind of was arrogant going in, oh, well, I understand this. I didn't, I realized after starting to interview people, nope, I don't understand it at all.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it? Yeah, just the gun thing, the whole gun culture.
Yeah.
The differences.
Well, in the SCRA conference, I had broken my foot and was in a wheelchair at the SCRA conference in Toronto. And they had brand new buildings that were inaccessible because they don't have the equivalent of the Americans with Disabilities Act. There were SCRA sessions that I could not go to because I was in a wheelchair. And this is at the university.
Yeah.
In Canada, you know, brand new building, didn't have a ramp.
Yeah.
All stairs.
I want to read two things in the chat just to make sure that they get into the recording. From Marcia Harris Brim, super helpful meeting. I agree with the comment made earlier that peer support needs notation of its fee for sessions component. The practice-based evidence notion was a very helpful idea, as was the community-based and cultural realities. Thank you. Yeah, Soviet body politic. And then Erica has a really beautiful long chat. Thank you. I'm very new to SCRA and the conference. I like that you opened the forum to include our comments on what we think about the group's terminology. Thank you. I was born in the US, study health psychology. My parents immigrated to the US, are nearing retirement, and speak very little English, but they have assimilated to American values in various other ways. For example, they have adopted mental health terminology and use it often. To Yawiga and Ernesto's comment about evidence-based practices, I continue to encourage more emphatic conversations surrounding mental health challenges and terminology. And I also choose to retain part of my Mexican culture's traditions and beliefs, for example, for spiritual healing. I take what works for me from both cultures. George's comment about interconnectedness really resonates with me as a philosophy. In practice, I take a more individualized approach to things like self-help, while keeping in mind that I am part of society's interwoven fabric and vice versa. Thank you so much, Erica. It was really, took a lot of effort to write that, but it was really beautiful. Yeah, so I'm a huge fan. It's like this old saying, right? The farther one travels, the less one knows. And that's what it means, right? You just see different places. It's like, oh, shit. My culture has all these great things that I never realized until I went here. But it also lacks all these things. And this place, right, has all these things that we don't have. But it also lacks these other things. And so, you know, teaching psychology in an international setting is like the greatest gift I've ever can imagine. And teaching anthropology would be the same, right? And or setting up these systems is the same. I don't know what to do about the, community psychology is becoming more international. In fact, the growth is more international. There's a great talk by Doug Perkins from Vanderbilt, who has a map of where community psychology started. And the irony is that community psychology is most popular in the places where it's least needed. That's one of his sort of outcomes of this. So there are 2 community psychologists in Bulgaria. And when I go visit the United States, right, there'll be one, but there's only one that's actually Bulgarian, and he graduated from Vanderbilt, started there on a Fulbright. So I think that's where the hope is. Any last or final thoughts in our last 15 minutes? What are you going to study in France, Miranda?
I just finished my bachelor's in anthropology, but it's been COVID weird. I did an exchange program in Nanterre for anthropology, but my degree is still American. And I'll be joining a doctorate program in sociology this fall, so I'm excited to continue to link these different disciplines.
Great. And will that be in France or in the U.S.?
In the U.S., in Boston and Northeastern. Okay. Yeah.
Great. Very nice. Good luck.
Thank you.
And congratulations.
Thank
you. Ernesto, I encourage you to apply for Fulbrights, even if you're a grad student. It'll pay for you to do international research for a school term. That's what I did during my 3rd year at DePaul, and changed everything for me. So,
Did you get a Fulbright to Bulgaria?
Yeah.
As a student, graduate student?
Yeah, as a graduate student. And then I came back as a scholar after I graduated, and then I got this job.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's about these connections. George, so George left. I'll give you 1 minute. I got a lot out of this, Thomasina. I don't know about you, but I got a lot out of this discussion. Okay, if there's no other things, we don't have to use up our entire 3 hours.
Okay.
We can end now. I want to thank everyone for joining this, either on time or late, as the case may be. It doesn't matter. I love the rule of 2 feet. And so, congratulate Community Psychology in 2018. Sorry, Ernesto. But you can apply as a scholar now, a Fulbright scholar to 150 some countries in the world. And I'm doing a mentoring session next week to talk about that. Yeah, Amber.
Just want to do a final plug for registering for the biennial. The biennial registration is open until Wednesday. This is the first year that we're having the theme of uprooting white supremacy. And if you haven't looked at the program schedule, it is available on the website. So we hope that you all can make it.
Hot off the presses today, right?
Did you send us a link to registering, Amber?
Yes, that was sent out on MemberClicks and it was on the listserv, but we'll definitely, over the next couple of days, you'll see a lot of communication about the biennial. And also Jadwiga put it in the chat.
Okay.
Here's my last plug about living in Bulgaria. This is your average tomato that you can buy in the store all year round. This smells like a real tomato. It tastes like a real tomato. When I go back to the United States, it's like what am I eating here? I'm eating wax. right? So if you ever had a garden or your parents had a garden, this is what they tasted like. I get this every day, among other things.
My sister lives in Israel, and when she comes to the US, she won't eat our fruits and vegetables. They are so subpar flavor-wise.
Hamburgers and pancakes, though, in the US are pretty good. So you got that going for it.
Very good.
All right, everyone.
Thank you,
so much.
everybody. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your contributions.
Thank you so much. It was really a fabulous meeting. I loved it, the whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia.
Thank
Thank you,
Thanks,
Amber.
everyone.
Okay, see you all
Bye.
next week, hopefully.
Bye all.
Bye.
Yes, see you next week. Bye-bye. Bye.